Hello, my name is Inga Shnyukaite. I am a deputy in UN Women Independent Evaluation Office. It's my pleasure to present to you an online lecture on advocating for equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation. This lecture provides a brief exploration of 3 topics: importance of including equity and gender perspective in evaluation, advocacy to overcome challenges in promoting and implementing equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations, and integrating dimensions of equity and gender in evaluation. Before discussing the importance of the equity and gender equality in evaluation, let's explore and define what do these terms and perspectives mean. What is equity? Equity is based on the concepts of fairness or social justice, of trying to redress existing social disadvantages in a proactive manner. The goal of equity-focused interventions is to eliminate the unfair and unavoidable circumstances that deprive certain population groups of their rights. The disparity is considered unfair or unjust, then its cause is due to the social context. Finally, pro-equity interventions prioritize worst of groups with the aim of achieving universal rights and equality for all. What is gender equality? Gender equality refers to the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women and men, girls and boys. Equality does not mean that women and men will become the same, but that women's and men's rights, responsibilities, and opportunities will not depend on whether they are born male or female. Gender equality is not a women's issue, but concerns and should be fully engaged with men as well as women. Equality between women and men is also an essential component for the realization of all human rights. Both concepts of equity and equality signify the need to address the social injustices and discrimination, but they have to be viewed in the continuum, moving from equitable policies and programs to equality as a goal and universal value, a legal standard, and a human right. Pro-equity interventions are a step or a strategy intended to achieve the ultimate goal of equality. Why does equality matter? Equality constitutes a violation of human rights. Inequality is one of the major obstacles in taking advantage of the richness of diversity. Inequality may lead to political conflict and instability. Prolonged inequality may lead to the naturalization of inequality. Equality has a significant positive impact in reducing monetary poverty, achieving development results, and social justice. Equality has a positive impact in the construction of socially fair, politically stable, economically strong democratic society. After clarifying the terms of equity and equality, we could define what equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation approaches are. An equity-focused evaluation is an assessment made of the relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact, and sustainability of interventions on equitable development results. So this definition is used, for instance, by UNICEF, which leads the promotion of the equity-focused evaluation. Gender-responsive evaluation, which is based on the concept of equality, is an assessment of the extent to which an intervention has resulted in progress or the lack thereof towards intended and unintended results regarding gender equality and the empowerment of women. So this definition is adopted from UN Women Evaluation Policy. Overall, Equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation could be defined as a group of evaluation approaches that draw on the principles of social justice, gender equality, participation, and transformation of power relations. In recent years, there has been a proliferation of analytical frameworks and approaches intended to facilitate the integration of gender equality perspectives in evaluation practice in response to two types of concerns. On the part of gender advocates, it has presented a recognition that evaluation, which draws on feminist scholarship and activism, is instrumental in ensuring responsiveness of policies and programs to gender equality concerns. On the part of policymakers, it came from the understanding that gender blindness of the past policy efforts has entailed avoidable development costs. And also, it came from the interest for evaluation and program planning tools to ensure that the same mistakes are not repeated in the future. The International Development Organizations has played an important role in situating program planning and evaluation within human rights frameworks and systematizing these approaches in the forms of user-friendly handbooks and checklists. For instance, United Nations Evaluations Group Handbook on Integrating Gender Equality and Human Rights in Evaluation, or UN Women's Manual on How to Manage Gender Responsive Evaluations, or UNICEF Blue Book on Equity-Focused Evaluation. So this slide, what you see in front, summarizes how these frameworks propose to integrate gender equality, but in a very broad strokes. So first of all, evaluation should apply gender analysis. That means that evaluators will focus on structural inequalities, power relations, access to resources. They will explore how strategic gender needs were addressed in the program or policy intervention. Evaluation will utilize gender-sensitive data collection techniques and usually will draw on the mixed evaluation methods. Another important element to have a gender-responsive evaluation is to have evaluators that have gender expertise and as well that the team is gender balanced. Finally, it's important that the assessment is focused on how the intervention has contributed to the achievement of results in improving the lives of women and men. The emerging evaluation practice shows that the integration of equity and gender equality perspective fosters wider participation of the worst of groups, facilitates dialogue between policymakers, and creates buy-in into recommendations. Such evaluations are most effective when they maximize participation and inclusiveness, as well as empower stakeholders to come together to influence policies that affect them. Knowledge generated from an equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation provides critical evidence to support advocacy with policymakers that are pro-equity and gender-focused to enhance the impact of social policies. Thirdly, equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation also provides information to leverage major partner resources and political commitment for national evaluation capacity development. In this part of the lecture, let's turn to the challenges in promoting and advocating for equity and gender equality in evaluations, and also discuss how to overcome some of them through advocacy efforts. There are many challenges in promoting equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations that are rooted in political, institutional, social, and cultural texture of societies. For example, one of the challenges could be the lack or even absence of disaggregated indicators, because some of these indicators may show that country performing is poor in particular areas, for instance, of gender equality. Political and social resistance to addressing the causes of exclusion and vulnerability and investing resources in the worst of groups. Poor governance, which prevents the centralization of authority and resources, resulting in limited delivery of services. The contentious legal status of worst of groups in some countries. When it comes to gender equality, some of the challenges would be connected to the discriminatory laws and practices against women and girls, absence of weak social movements and women's organizations that could support gender equality and women's empowerment agenda, stereotypes and social norms with regards to roles of men and women in societies. Potential challenges in implementing equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations are chiefly connected to the evaluation methodologies and also the blindness of programs designed to equity and gender equality issues. So equity-focused and gender-responsive programs and policies are usually very complex, and that raises methodological challenges. The lack of disaggregated data and data collection capacity could raise challenges for implementing this type of evaluations. Additional costs and complexity, the need to base the program and the evaluation on the program theory of change for more in-depth analysis. Sometimes it could be also the challenge, the reluctance of some governments to work with civil society groups, what are critical for equity and gender-responsive evaluations. As discussed, various challenges can be faced when promoting and implementing equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations. Some of these challenges can be overcome by advocating for national evaluation policies and systems that are equity-focused and gender-responsive. Such evaluation policies and systems should explicitly create a roadmap that will lead to promotion, implementation, and use of equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluations. Building on evaluation advocacy practice, then strengthening advocacy for equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation, it is important to build constituency of advocates that promote equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation policies. Another important aspect is support participation of marginalized groups, including groups of disadvantaged women and men within all stages of the evaluation advocacy strategy. Link the existing platforms to gain strengths in evaluation advocacy. For instance, use such international organizations like, for instance, UN Women, UNICEF, or emerging networks like Eval Partners and others who has particular interest in promoting pro-equity and gender equality agendas. Capture and share knowledge around pro-equity and gender evaluation advocacy through events, conferences, social media that helps to raise awareness on the issue and also help to shape common solutions and challenges. Exchange and cross-fertilize ideas, experiences, challenges, innovations, and lessons in the area of equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation. In the last section of this lecture, let's review what does it mean to integrate equity and gender perspective in evaluation, as this is critical for advocacy efforts in this area. While applying equity and gender equality approaches, we have to rethink on what we evaluate and how we evaluate. In terms of what should be evaluated, evaluation should pose research questions about gender equality, equity, about structural discrimination practices that may be affecting the reach and success of the program and policy. For instance, equity-focused and gender-responsive evaluation assess if interventions have based or been guided by the relevant national, regional, and international normative frameworks for social equity and gender equality. For example, in the context of UN Women, in our evaluations, we always try to assess how the programs is aligned, for instance, with such international frameworks like Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Other aspect of the equity and gender responsive evaluation is that it would analyze the structures that contributed to inequalities experienced by women, men, girls, and boys, especially those experiencing multiple forms of exclusion. The evaluators will ask whether the programs maximize participation and inclusiveness of rights holders and duty bearers in the planning, design, implementation, and decision-making processes. They will also assess whether there are opportunities to build sustainable results through the empowerment of capacity building of women groups and rights holders and duty bearers. They look how the interventions contributed to short, medium, and long-term objectives or lack thereof through an examination of result chains, processes, contextual factors, and causality using gender and human rights analysis. So in addition, these approaches will put a strong emphasis on excluded and disadvantaged groups in assessing whether their needs and interests have been addressed by the intervention and whether these interventions promote inclusive approaches for their voices to be heard. In terms of how equity and gender focus is included in actual evaluation process, it could be said that equity-focused gender-responsive evaluations, data collection, and analysis techniques are built on approaches that are already familiar to many evaluators. So they build on such evaluations as participatory, democratic, critical evaluation, real evaluation, and other approaches. The emphasis is on refining and focusing existing techniques and also enhancing national capacities to use those techniques rather than starting with a completely new approach. I would like to end with a practical example from African Gender and Development Evaluators Network. The activities of this network provide example of the advocacy efforts for gender and human rights responsive evaluation. Strengthening equity-focused and gender-sensitive evaluation systems and evaluations in general is the core mandate of the Africa Gender and Development Evaluators Network. Actually, so far, this is the only one evaluation network that specifically focuses on gender perspective in evaluation. This network developed a toolkit on gender and human rights responsive monitoring evaluation. They conduct training workshops, conference presentations, and online discussions. ACDEN also does research studies, discusses, advocates, and gives training on integrating the key principles of gender and human rights in the planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of development interventions, programs, and policies. Finally, ACDEN has constructed a model on how these principles can be integrated within the 5 OECD DAC evaluation criteria of relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, sustainability, and impact. To conclude, there are quite a few interesting initiatives such as ACDEN, regional and national evaluation networks that have a specific focus on social justice and gender equality issues. They provide excellent platform to advocate and make issues of equity and gender equality more visible in evaluation, and through this developing more fair and equitable policies and programs for all. So thank you for taking this video lecture.